Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome officially to the channel. This is a series where we look into the history of various different ways that developers have made to help us interact with video games. Some physically, some mentally. Some were merely meant to be expansions of existing systems, or to give it more capabilities or enhanced graphics like the Sega CD, and some are surrounded with a bit of confusion like our current one today, the Nintendo 64 expansion pack. Now, this is not to be confused with the current Switch N64 expansion. That offering lets you play Nintendo 64 games on your Switch. I know that sounds redundant and stupid, but every time I searched for the expansion pack, that came up. This is an often confusing and somewhat odd add-on for your original Nintendo 64. Now, why they felt the need to build this into their latest system with not one but two expansion ports isn't quite clear to me. But it's something that Nintendo often did. They would often put ports on the bottom of their consoles. The SNES had one, which was a holdover for allowing devices like the Satellaview to be attached to the system on the Super Famicom. They also had one on the bottom of the NES that allowed for tape drives on the actual Famicom itself. Basically, it's a visual holdover from when they redesigned the system for the American market. However, with the Nintendo 64, they had not one but two of these ports. This was in part, I think, because they were meant to work in conjunction with one another. You see, Nintendo had some plans to take the N64 online at some point. So to that end, they wanted to introduce a disk drive, the 64DD, which is out of the scope of this video, but it's important for the topic at hand. You see, this would allow you to connect online and download data. I suspect they made this expansion pack simply because of the memory boost. This would allow for it to process and work more smoothly with the original system's 4MB RAM, which probably wouldn't allow much for outside of the main console itself. However, including more RAM would mean increasing the cost of the system, which would make it much greater than its launch price of $200. So Nintendo Nintendo came up with a plan. They would add not one, but two expansion slots to the unit. The one on top would have what's known as a jumper pack inside it. This served no real practical application outside of terminating the RAM bus inside the console. Think of it as terminating a connection when it's not in use. The expansion pack itself, however, would replace this by popping the cover off of the top of the panel labeled simply Memory Expansion. You would then pull out the jumper pack and slip in the expansion pack. Once you booted up the system, your system memory would be doubled from 4MB of memory to 8MB of memory. This was a fairly inexpensive expansion, coming in around $40 retail if you had to buy it on its own. However, if you were a fan of Donkey Kong and had the 64, you could pick up Donkey Kong 64. Since this add-on came packed with that game, there was no reason not to just do it that way. You see, the reason the expansion pack was included with Donkey Kong has a few theories. One of which is that Donkey Kong 64 was just too big to work without the expansion pack, in part due to a game-breaking bug that popped up near the end of the development cycle, and the expanded memory helped fix that. This explanation doesn't really make a ton of sense for me, given that Rare had a really good track record of development across multiple Nintendo consoles, and had already done very large games on the console with Conker's Bad Fur Day. Most likely, the second theory that Nintendo themselves wanted Rare to heavily push the system in order to justify the memory pack makes far more sense. Nintendo would want to sell as many of the expansion packs as they could to justify the cost of taking a small loss on Donkey Kong, including it to say that, hey, here are games that need this. To get more people to either buy that game or the expansion pack independently would be one way of doing this. This isn't to say that there wasn't a bug in development. Mark Stevenson, one of the lead artists, actually confirmed as much, but stated it was fixed independently of the expansion pack and not because of the expansion pack itself. On top of Donkey Kong, the pack actually did several other things for the base console itself. It improved the resolution of several games. For example, it would give you a high resolution mode in Star Wars Rogue Squadron. It also enabled it in Episode 1 Battle for Naboo and Episode 1 Embracer, just to name a few. The expansion pack would also allow for a larger color palette, which it allowed a high color mode in games like 007 The World Is Not Enough. It didn't just add a higher resolution in colors though. Some games were built specifically with the expansion pack in mind. Perfect Dark, for example, would only let you play a few multiplayer modes unless you put in the expansion pack. Once you did, you opened up the single player campaign. Now just imagine how furious someone would be picking up an $80 game and not having access to the campaign without another $40 add-on. It also made games like Majora's Mask possible. You see, Majora's Mask had more assets on the screen at one time and less fog overall, which was something that was pretty prevalent in Ocarina of Time. This was largely responsible because of the extra memory. It would even cut out part of StarCraft 64 Brood War. Yeah, if you didn't have the expansion pack installed, the Brood War expansion for StarCraft 64 Brood War wouldn't even be accessible to you at all. It wasn't all positive though. Some games like Station Silicon Valley, which worked great prior to the expansion pack's inclusion, would crash repeatedly with it installed. This left consumers with a problem. They would either have to hope they kept the jumper pack and pull out the expansion pack and put back in the jumper pack so that they could play the game, or just not play the game, because if they didn't, the game became a buggy mess full of game-breaking crashes due to not being able to handle the inclusion of a new memory device. And I know you say, well, why not just pull the expansion pack and not worry about the jumper pack? Well, remember when I said it terminated the RAM bus? Yeah, that's the problem. Since it terminates that without one or the other in the system, the console wouldn't boot at all. Now, going back to Station Silicon Valley, I suspect, and this is just me speculating, that they used a generic memory reference rather than declaring the local RAM specifically. This caused the game to get confused when the memory expansion pack was installed, as the system would just use memory as memory. It didn't declare one area of memory over the other. And the game had no idea how to reference the expanded memory. So when something got stored in the extra section of memory, the game wouldn't be able to locate it and crash. However, what do you guys think of this one? Did any of you ever actually put this into your console, and how much of its functionality did you use? Did you think it was fair to require this of the consumer, or lock them out of half or more of their $80 games? Let me know in the comments. However, for now, I'd like to thank you guys for spending part of your day with me. If I could impose on you one more time, if you could hit the like button, it really helps me out. And if you haven't, consider subscribing. That helps me out a ton. However, for now, thank you for watching, and until next time, happy gaming.